Well, the UFC wasted no time with that one. Jean Silva versus Bryce Mitchell is already booked, and that's insane. That was ridiculously fast. But to be fair, Jean Silva took 0 damage in his last fight against Malik, finishing him with that beautiful first round TKO. So to be honest, I love seeing this kind of activity from him. The UFC is clearly trying to keep his momentum going. Now, without getting too deep into it, I think we can all agree that the UFC might be setting Bryce up here, given all the controversy around him lately. It kind of feels like they're feeding him to a killer, maybe even hoping that he gets knocked out. But as a pure fight, I love this matchup because stylistically, this is Jean Silva's first real test, in my opinion. Up until now, he's mostly been fighting strikers, with some decent grappling in there, but nothing like what Bryce brings to the table. This is the first time he's facing a legit grappler in the UFC. Maybe he fought some wrestlers on the regional scenes, but at this stage, Bryce Mitchell is by far the toughest stylistic challenge he had to deal with, at least on paper. Now, I know some people are looking at this and thinking, oh, Bryce Mitchell just got knocked out by Josh Emmett in the first round. That's easy money for Jean. But that's where it gets interesting. Now, if Jean can keep this on the feet, sure, he probably picks Bryce apart. But if Bryce gets this fight to the ground, we might see Jean in some deep water. You know what I'm saying? That's what makes this fight so intriguing. And look, man, just because I titled the bad stylistic matchup, it doesn't mean necessarily that he's going to lose, referring to Jean Silva. Obviously, because I do think it's a hard stylistic matchup just in general, because we haven't seen Jean's grappling defense for the most part in the UFC, if I'm not mistaken. But let's be real, this fight is different. Up until now, we mostly seen Jean Silva against strikers, and he's handled himself really well. But this is a grappling match with Bryce Mitchell. Bryce Mitchell is going to be in there with one goal: getting this fight into the ground, holding Jean down, and making it, well, not really ugly, but he's just going to try to keep him down there, And look, man, people can say whatever they want about Bryce, but when it comes to his skill set, he's a problem. We already saw Charles Jourdain take Jean down multiple times, and while Jean was able to work his way back up, let's not kid ourselves. Jourdain is nowhere near the level of a grappler that Bryce Mitchell is. If Charles could get those takedowns, what do you think Bryce is going to do? That's something that people need to think about before assuming Jean's just going to walk through him. Now, that being said, I get why people are high on Jean Silva. He's explosive, he's fun to watch, and he's got this rising prospect energy where the fans are just rallying behind him. And I'm not gonna lie, it's pretty badass. And I mean, this dude isn't even ranked yet, but people are already throwing him into this fight like he's a top contender. That's how much hype is behind him. He looks insane against Malik. The fight before that was impressive too, and now he's being tested against someone who can completely shut his game down if he's not careful. But let's not pretend he's just gonna roll over. Bryce can hold his own on the feet. Yeah, Josh Emmett knocked him out, but Josh has scary power. Jean is more about speed and precision, which could be an issue for Bryce. But at the same time, Jean hasn't fought someone who's gonna drag him deep into deep water like this. Let's not forget, Bryce Mitchell actually made it competitive with Ilia Topuria. People overlooked that because of how the fight ended, but early on, Bryce was slipping some of those boxing exchanges and even got a takedown. Yeah, Topuria adjusted quickly and put him away in the second, but that first round showed that Bryce can at least find some success with high-level guys. And that's just the thing, man. When Bryce Mitchell takes people down, he's not usually finishing them. That's not really his game. He's more of a control-heavy grappler, someone who thrives on dragging guys into deep waters and keeping them there. He doesn't go in there looking for a quick submission or ground and pound stoppage. Instead, he tries to drown you, hold you down, and make you work for everything. And in most cases, it works. We saw that against Dan Ige. He was able to take Ige down and pretty much control him for very long stretches of that fight. And that's what makes this matchup with Jean Silva so interesting, because Bryce doesn't have that one-shot ability to shut down the fight. He's not Ilia Topuria. He's not Josh Emmett. He's not going to start Jean Silva with one big shot. If he's going to win, it's going to be through control, through grinding out rounds, making Jean work for every escape, every scramble. And that's the dangerous game to play against someone like Jean. And that's the real big question here. Can Jean Silva handle that kind of test? We already know that he's got this insane striking, but we also see him struggle with grappling just in general. If Bryce is able to get in on him, take him down, and control him, does Jean have the answers to get back on his feet? Because this isn't going to be about just getting back up. He has to do it against a guy whose entire game is built around keeping people down. If Jean passes this test with flying colors, then yeah, the hype is 100% justified. But if he struggles, then we're going to see just how big of a hole he still has in his game. Again, let me clarify this before someone in the comments tries to twist it. What I'm saying, no, I don't think Bryce Mitchell is going to beat Jean Silva. I still have Jean Silva winning this fight. I do think it'll be somewhat competitive, but I also want to acknowledge the danger here because Bryce is good. We've seen him take guys down like Dan Ige, so it's not like he's a scrub, you know what I'm saying? But with all that being said, this is where I see Jean winning. And this is how I see him getting it done. First off, the striking gap in this fight is massive. Bryce Mitchell has improved on the feet, sure, but he's nowhere near the level of Jean Silva when it comes to speed, precision, and overall striking IQ. Jean is one of those guys who doesn't just throw shots, he sets things up beautifully. He makes reads quickly, and once he finds his rhythm, he starts lighting people up. The biggest thing here is Bryce's entries. He's gonna be shooting for takedowns, and while he is a solid wrestler, his setups aren't exactly the cleanest. Jean is going to see a lot of those shots coming, and that's where his counters come into play. He's got the reaction time to sprawl, the footwork to circle away, and most importantly, the power to make Bryce pay for those sloppy entries. Now, if Bryce shoots without setting them up properly, Jean is going to catch him with some nasty knees up the middle, uppercuts, or even stepping up back and firing with a straight right. And if Bryce does get him down, that's where things get interesting. We've seen Jean struggle with grapplers before, like I mentioned earlier, but we've also seen his ability to work his way back up. The key difference here is that Jean is way more explosive than a lot of guys that Bryce has fought. Bryce loves that slow, grinding style where he can get a takedown and just keep guys down. But that's going to be way harder to do against someone as athletic as Jean. If Jean can stay composed, doesn't accept bottom position, and work his way up like we've seen him do, Bryce is going to burn a lot of energy just trying to keep him down there. And once they're back on the feet, that's where the fight starts breaking Bryce down. The longer that this fight stays on the feet, the worse it gets for him. Bryce is tough, but he's extremely hittable in my opinion. And Jean isn't the kind of striker you can just walk through. He doesn't need too long to land a bomb. He'll chip away at you, mix up his targets, and the more Bryce eats shots, the more desperate his takedown attempts will get. That's when Jean starts picking him apart. I can see this fight going one of two ways. Either Jean keeps it standing and gets another highlight reel knockout, or he has to work through some adversity, stuff some takedowns, maybe even get taken down once or twice, but eventually force Bryce to fight at a pace he can't keep up with. And once Bryce starts to slow down, it's only a matter of time before Jean finds the shot that puts him away. And that's what makes this matchup with Jean Silva so interesting, because Bryce doesn't have that one shot ability to just shut the fight down. He's not Topuria, he's not Josh Emmett, he's not going to start Jean Silva with that one big shot. If he's going to win, it's going to be through control, through grinding out rounds, making Jean work for every escape, every scramble, and that's the dangerous game to play against someone like Jean. So yeah, I think Jean wins the fight. Could Bryce have his moments? Sure, but the skill gap in the striking is too wide in my opinion. Jean's takedown defense and ability to get back are improving, and once the fight goes into the later rounds, it starts becoming a nightmare for Bryce in my opinion. Jean is too fast, too sharp, and too dangerous in the stand-up, and that's why I see him getting his hand raised in this one. And listen, one thing I really like to think about with Jean Silva is that he's actively improving with his grappling defense. This isn't a guy who's just relying on striking and hoping that's enough. He's putting in the work and it's showing. He's training with the Fighting Nerds, a team that's known for the technical approach for MMA, and that tells me one thing. He's serious about rounding out his game. He's not walking into fights thinking, oh, I just need to stuff takedowns and I'll be fine. He's preparing for the worst case scenario. He's sharpening his ability to not only defend a takedown, but also to scramble, get back to his feet, and not let guys like Bryce Mitchell hold him down.